Let's start with the fact that unlike any FBI director before, this guy is a vitriolic partisan. This is from his book that contains, called Government Gangsters, and this is a page of his enemies list. Here's what Kash Patel himself says about it. Names named, roadmap unveiled, the manhunt starts tomorrow. If you're going to set up a manhunt against people, are they not your enemies by any logical definition of the term? He goes on to a video that shows himself chainsawing off the heads of the people on his enemies list, including junior senator from California and the daughter of former vice president. Things like that are not appropriate for an FBI director. They're bizarre for just a normally weird person. Here's what the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. When I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island, if one of my FBI agents had gone over into the United States District Court in Rhode Island and testified in a criminal case in such a way that one of the United States district judges said about that witness, we'd be looking into that. This comes darn close to being what is called giglio material. Why we have not had a straight answer yet from our Republican colleagues about why the guy who wants to be the head of the FBI pled the Fifth? It is an unprecedented, terrible situation.
This isn't a hearing. This is a senator standing on the floor of the United States Senate the day before the confirmation vote and delivering what he calls a final warning. The enemies list, shown live on the Senate floor. The chainsaw video, reposted by Patel himself, depicting heads being cut off, including a sitting senator and the daughter of a former vice president. Children's books where King Donald rules, and Patel pursues the enemies of the kingdom. In a public claim made on podcast after podcast that federal law enforcement was behind January 6th, beyond a reasonable doubt, which every investigation has shown to be completely false. Then a federal judge, in a real courtroom, on the record, found that Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence. Whitehouse explains what that finding means as a former U.S. attorney. It's giglio material. It ends FBI agents' careers. And this man is about to run the organization. And then the one detail nobody has fully explained. Kash Patel pleaded the Fifth Amendment. Never before in American law enforcement history has someone sought a top position who did that. He won't say what it was about. Republicans won't explain why they confirmed him anyway. This is the Senate floor speech that every Republican who voted yes will own the consequences of. Let's go through every second of it. And subscribe now, because this series documents everything, including the warnings that came before any of it happened.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here to join my distinguished colleague from California in opposition to the nomination of Kash Patel and to make crystal clear to this body what he is going to do in that job. He has shown who he is. So when these things go wrong, I want to be absolutely clear that our Republican friends were warned. They will own the consequences of Kash Patel's misbehavior. Let's start with the fact that unlike any FBI director before, this guy is a vitriolic partisan. And those are the stripes he shows when he is left to his own devices, and those are the characteristics he will revert back to when he is running the FBI. This is from his book that contains, called Government Gangsters, and this is a page of his enemies list. Well, Attorney General Bondi said nobody should come to a law enforcement job with an enemies list. So then they had to pretend that this was not an enemies list. Well, of course it's an enemies list. Here's what Kash Patel himself says about it. Names named, roadmap unveiled, the manhunt starts tomorrow. If you're going to set up a manhunt against people, are they not your enemies by any logical definition of the term? He goes on to a video that shows himself chainsawing off the heads of the people on his enemies list, including the handsome junior senator from California and the daughter of former Vice President Cheney. It's a pretty gross image to be cutting the heads off of people with a saw, and he didn't put it up, but he retweeted it. He loved it so much that he put it up on his own media. Things like that are not appropriate for an FBI director. They're bizarre for just a normally weird person, but for an abnormally weird person to be the director of the FBI, things are going to go bad. Be warned. He is also a completely sycophantic suck-up when it comes to Donald Trump. He wrote children's books in which King Donald rules, and his loyal little functionary, Kash, brings justice to him, pursuing the slugs of the FBI. When the FBI is asked to investigate corruption in Trump world, all you have to do is look at his own conduct and his own history. This is not Democrats saying this. What we're doing is relating what he has said and what he has done. This is Kash Patel on Kash Patel.
The enemies list being shown live on the Senate floor the day before the confirmation vote is a deliberate and significant act, and Whitehouse's framing of it is the most precise in any speech in this series. He doesn't just say Patel has an enemies list. He connects it to Bondi's own words. She said nobody should come to law enforcement with one. Then they had to pretend the list isn't what it is. That sequence is the institutional contradiction in one sentence. The administration's own attorney general stated the standard and then confirmed the person who violates it. The chainsaw video detail lands harder than most commentators have acknowledged. This isn't a meme that went past Patel's attention. He loved it enough to repost it on his own platform, depicting himself sawing off the heads of political opponents, including a sitting United States senator, is the kind of conduct Whitehouse is right to say is bizarre for a normally weird person. For someone about to run the FBI, it's something different. The January 6th federal law enforcement conspiracy claim is the one that has the clearest factual record behind it. Patel said on record, in an interview, that he would get people beyond a reasonable doubt that federal law enforcement was behind January 6th. Every subsequent investigation, including ones run by people in his own party, found that claim to be false. Not disputed, not nuanced. False. What comes next moves from conduct to credentials, and the colleagues who worked alongside Patel are the ones making the credibility argument.
Federal law enforcement involved in making January 6th happen. Patel's response, I'll get you to beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, he believed and said federal law enforcement agencies were behind January 6th. We know that is preposterous. We know that is false. We know that investigations have shown that none of that is even remotely true. That is completely false information. The FBI is going to have to appear before judges and convince judges of the probity of the agency, of the legitimacy of the agency, of the propriety of the investigation, that the department has done a fair job of marshaling the evidence. Here's what he says about judges. If they've ruled against Donald Trump, they were a political terrorist in his view. Any case that Donald Trump's been charged in, almost every judge is handling this thing as if they were not a judge, but a political terrorist. And of course, he meant the Trump judge down in Florida as the only one accepted. When you start talking about judges that way, you can't then expect judges not to pay attention when you come before them trying to do the work of the FBI. What have his former colleagues said about him? Every single one a Trump appointee. John Bolton, National Security Advisor. I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. Political pressure jammed him into the job, and Bolton said, I don't want any part of this guy. I was forced to hire him. The Attorney General Bill Barr, they tried to force him on Bill Barr as deputy director of the FBI. And he said, Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to lead the FBI, and said, over my dead body does he get that job. These are the job recommendations of his own colleagues that show his unfitness. And the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, I'm no friend of Gina Haspel, but here's what she said about him. If he came over, she would resign before allowing Patel to assume a position as her deputy. This is a guy who has a record of engagement with Trump appointees that show that he is not qualified, not capable, and somebody that they would resign before they'd let work for them. And now we're supposed to let him work for the American people? It is ridiculous.
The colleague indictment is the most politically significant section of this speech, and Whitehouse is right to emphasize that these are not Democrats making these assessments. Bolton, Barr, Haspel, all Trump appointees. All people who worked inside the same administration, alongside Patel, with direct knowledge of his work product and judgment. Their assessments, forced to hire him, virtually no qualifying experience, would resign before working with him, aren't partisan attacks. They're institutional evaluations from people who have every incentive to support Republican nominees. Whitehouse's central question is the most honest one in this entire speech. When the FBI is asked to investigate corruption in Trump's world, will Patel rise to the occasion or participate in a cover-up? He says the answer is in Patel's own conduct and history. That's not a prediction. It's a reading of documented behavior. But what comes next is the detail that Whitehouse, as a former U.S. attorney, says should have stopped this confirmation before it started, a federal judge's finding about Patel's credibility in a real courtroom.
He testified once in state court on a Trump-related case, and his testimony was, to put it mildly, not convincing. Here's what the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, people come into court, they lie, the court doesn't believe their nonsense, and statements like this happen all the time in court. But here's where they don't happen. They don't happen with federal law enforcement agents. Because when I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island, if one of my FBI agents had gone over into the United States District Court in Rhode Island and testified in a criminal case in such a way that one of the United States District judges said about that witness, he was not a credible witness, his testimony was illogical, devoid of evidence in the record, we'd be looking into that. This comes darn close to being what is called giglio material. Material that the government is forced to disclose to future defendants when it bears on the credibility of a government witness, an agent who is a government witness. People lose their careers over giglio material. This, if he was an FBI agent, would have caused a response in headquarters to say, what the hell is going on? How did one of our people get involved in such flagrantly fake testimony that he was called out by the judge in the case like this? And this is the person that they want to put in charge of the organization, whose probity and whose professionalism and whose integrity are essential to the successful working of the organization. And the guy was basically called out as a liar and a fraud in plain court. This guy is a hot mess. And when you have a character like this that lies in court, that runs chainsaw memes about your opponents, that every person who he tried to work with who was senior in the Trump administration said, get this bum out of here, I don't want to be anywhere near him.
The giglio explanation is the most technically specific and institutionally damaging argument in this entire speech, and it carries weight precisely because Whitehouse is speaking from direct professional experience. Giglio material is a legal term for information that must be disclosed to defense attorneys when a law enforcement agent who received a credibility finding from a court is going to testify as a government witness. It's not a slap on the wrist. It's a documented record that follows an agent through every subsequent case they're involved in. Defense attorneys can use it to challenge their testimony. Prosecutors have to disclose it. Careers end over it. Whitehouse is saying that what Patel received, not a credible witness, a logical testimony, completely devoid of any evidence, is the category of finding that ends FBI careers. And the person who received it is now running the institution. The hot mess line isn't rhetoric. It's the conclusion of a specific professional assessment from someone who spent years as a U.S. attorney working with FBI agents and watching what happens when their credibility is challenged in court. What Whitehouse closes with is the detail that makes everything else in this speech feel like a prelude. And it's the one that has received the least attention despite being the most unprecedented thing in any confirmation in this series.
Don't think that his Trump servience as FBI director won't turn on you. Just because he's a vitriolic partisan who despises Democrats doesn't mean that when Trump's ire moves someplace else to Republican office holders, he won't be there to deliver the FBI as an enforcer against you. So there's a lot to be concerned about. I'll close with this. Never before in the history of American law enforcement has somebody sought to attain a high position in American law enforcement who has pled the Fifth Amendment. Not only did he plead the Fifth Amendment, but he refused to tell the committee what it was all about. You can't plead the Fifth unless you have a reasonable expectation that could put you in jeopardy of a crime. What crime? How in jeopardy? Explain that. You're not just a normal person. You're trying to be the head of the FBI. In a civil case, pleading the Fifth entitles the judge to instruct the jury to draw an adverse interest about your testimony, that the jury can find against you because you took the Fifth. Why we have not had a straight answer yet from our Republican colleagues about why the guy who wants to be the head of the FBI pled the Fifth? It is an unprecedented, terrible situation. With that, I yield the floor.
The warning to Republican colleagues is the most politically sophisticated argument Whitehouse makes, and it's the one that cuts across party lines. He's not saying Patel will only target Democrats. He's saying an FBI director who functions as a political enforcer for whoever holds executive power will eventually point that enforcement wherever the political winds direct. Republican office holders who are confident they'll always be on the right side of Trump's attention have historical precedent to reconsider that confidence. First terms produce loyalty. Second terms and political transitions produce expendability. Then the Fifth Amendment. This is the detail that should have dominated confirmation coverage and largely didn't. Kash Patel pleaded the Fifth Amendment in a legal proceeding, not a hypothetical, a documented invocation of the constitutional protection against self-incrimination. You cannot invoke that protection without a reasonable belief that your testimony could expose you to criminal liability. That's not a democratic characterization. That's the constitutional standard for when the Fifth applies. He refused to explain to the committee what the proceeding was about or what potential criminal exposure the invocation was protecting against. And Whitehouse's final question, the one he says Republicans have never answered, is the most important unanswered question in this confirmation. Why is someone who pleaded the Fifth about something he won't describe to Congress now running the Federal Bureau of Investigation? The vote was 51-49. The warnings are on the Senate floor record. Everything documented in this series, since that vote, is what happens after warnings get ignored. Subscribe, because this series tracks every consequence, not just every confirmation.